I'm going to, in keeping with the theme on this session of the macro, we're going to talk about economic development, and I feel fortunate going last because Anna and Max and Alex set up a lot of these ideas. When Anna looked at Singapore as this small island nation, but the reach of its product and the need for aviation to get the flowers and the fish and the people there and how it impacts locally. With Max, completely agree on the Aerotropolis idea. One of my assignments was with a mayor of a city, and the airport director was pushing the Aerotropolis plan, and the mayor said quite simply, you know, the Aerotropolis is my city, and that's where it's going to be. There's a very common political element in what we do with airports, and so you've got to think broader, look at it in more of a macro, and also then with Alex to finish up, that ability to knit the airport together with the city is part of what I'd like to set up. So I'm going to touch on a little bit about airports as economic engines because it's a theme as part of this. Airports as a civic front door, because creating the brand is part of the identity of the city. Airports and urban development, where you are now competing on a global scale. I'm going to talk about that in the United States as well as in Europe and the Middle East. This concept that was introduced for this panel on superior airports and what has created it and what has held that back. And then lastly, critical community issues that are going forward, how communities working with the other stakeholders are going to be able to deliver the infrastructure that's required to support the economic growth that needs to occur. So airports as economic engines. Looking at the United States as a market, for example, or think about the city or the town that you live in. Most cities have a number of school districts. You might have 10, 20 school districts in your city. You'll have 5 major hospitals, but most have just one airport. And so it's a very concentrated asset that draws a lot of attention from all the stakeholders. In the US market, the top 100 airports handle 90% of the traffic in the United States. So it's a very small set of assets that are critical importance to economic development. If you look at the US market, I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but what this is setting up is how is economic development measured relative to aviation. And the 3 primary measures that are used are the jobs that are created, the payroll that is generated as an economic impact, and then the additional impact of the businesses that support that activity or that are created from the activity. Half of every airplane generally that lands in your city is full of people that don't live there. We're the perfect example at this conference where you've heard people want to travel. I brought my children with me on this trip, and so we don't represent the community with the issues here, but we represent the benefit to the community coming in, and so we have to look at both sides of that. What is it that airports create? This is just a sample of something I was working on in the United States where we were looking at airports. You can see that the focus is on jobs. It's on payroll that generates taxes in the community and other types of tax revenues, and it stimulates the local economy. The challenge now is that we have a shift for economic development and how things are measured. The traditional model for a lot of communities was that you had an asset like an automobile manufacturing facility or any kind of manufacturing facility where you could set it in your community and you could measure how many workers came in every day, so you knew how many jobs were created, and you could measure how many widgets came out of the factory, be it an automobile or some other piece. And the community leaders, the government entities have set up, realizing the economic benefit of a manufacturing type operation, have set up benefits financially to invest in that and to encourage that kind of activity. Airports are much harder to quantify in the same way that you can look at the output of a factory operation. And so what's happened in the aviation industry is the global financial crisis in 2008 really put a spotlight on the value of commercial air service in a community and the economic development impact that air service has. And in the United States, many communities lost 10 to up to 50% of their air service after the global financial crisis. And it was at that time that mayors or county executives or governors started getting phone calls from their business communities, from their visitor and tourism entities, complaining that they had lost nonstop air service to cities and visitors couldn't come, or the business community was complaining that they could no longer get to a destination and back in the same day, and it was impacting quality of life because instead of being able to come home and go to my son's soccer game, I have to stay another night because I couldn't get back because that service had been cut into that city. And so it really raised awareness of the connection of economic development between the airports and the in the community. Subsequently, U.S. airlines merged through the economic crisis, and they became much more balance sheet focused. And the impact of that was that communities began to realize they actually don't control their air service. When we looked at what Max put up there, he had three entities in his diagram. I would offer up there's really a fourth one now, which are the airlines. So you have the community, which are the political leaders, the business leaders, the residents, and the visitors. You have the airport, and then you also have the airline. Because now, if you don't have the airline bringing the service in, it doesn't matter how much you want it. What are you going to do about it financially to commit to it? Because the airlines are now about their balance sheet. Their level of interest in your community is only based on the route planning numbers that they're generating internally to fly to a particular city. The growth of commercial air service allows the entire community to benefit. It's creating jobs, it's creating tax revenues, it's saving time, it's driving quality of life issues, and it's providing cities and regions with competitive advantages compared to other regions that don't have the same amount of air service. The emerging trends that have come out of this awareness or this epiphany on the value of air service is that on-airport capital development is moving forward. In the U.S. market, you're finally seeing projects that have been long stalled start to move forward because the political criticism of the state of the U.S. airports has begun. The prior community opposition is now shifting to more of community support and solutions because people are realizing in a place like Southern California that it's easier to go to the airport in Burbank than it is to drive through all of Metro Los Angeles to get to LAX, or it's easier in New York to go to some of the secondary airports than it is to go to the main airport. So the community opposition that existed 10 or 20 years ago is starting to shift. The private capital is entering the U.S. market after it's been available in the European and Asian market. And governments are realizing that their core function is not running an airport, which is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week operation. And so the private equity money is starting to come into the U.S. market in a slow way, but it's beginning. And what that's going to do is it allows communities. It's interesting on the scale. It allows a community that's run a really good airport and that has built value in the asset to unlock the asset through a government program in the United States, take that money out and deploy that money back into the community. So when you talk about airports and communities, you can actually have an airport that would go through a public-private partnership, unlock $750 million, $1 billion worth of an upfront payment, and that government stakeholder can now take that money and deploy it into its community for other transformative projects. It also rewards airports that are actually poorly run because there's such a strong emphasis on the airlines to get that to change that the private sector has been able to come in and have some success there. I want to talk a minute about airports as the civic front door. You keep seeing this Saarinen building. I actually started in aviation 31 years ago and was hired by TWA, which is the airline that operated this terminal. My very first assignment was go in the back room, kid, and put the drawings back together because they had been taken apart and scattered throughout our offices. And so I became very familiar with this facility, but it's really the brand or the impact. So the airline started out initially with the era of flight and creating this branding. And you had the TWA terminal, you had the Pan Am Worldport, and that has begun to shift to more of a community-based branding. And some communities understand the importance of that branding and tying it back to the urban landscape. Here at Denver, when they sell a postcard of your city's airport in the gift shop on the way out, you know you've designed something that is iconic and that has reached the entire market and has become the symbol for your city. Now, similarly to what Alex showed, this is an airport that has not embraced the brand. I'm not even going to tell you where it is if some of you might be able to figure it out. But that, and so this is where architecture ties back this economic development. It's not enough to just to go out and want to do it, but it's that execution that is going to create that sense of place and that civic pride. And with half of the people on the airplane coming in for the first time, this is what they're going to see of your city, and you don't want them seeing that. So where is it taking us in a more macro scale in aviation? You're starting to see competition on a global scale. And while the airports in the world tend to be monopolies, and what happens when you have an operation that's a monopoly? Well, without competition, you have mature markets, they're monopolies, they become stagnant, the operators become complacent, and the communities build opposition to development over time. And so what you have is on-airport capital development that's delayed by community opposition. Whether it's, as mentioned in London, these planning approvals that take half a generation to get through the next step. And everybody watched aviation grow, they grew their hubs, and now the community opposition has built. There's political criticism of the expansion of the airports, there's community opposition, and there's environmental regulation and local planning regulation. This has diminished the partnership with the airlines. The airlines are facing escalating airport costs, but they have less operating efficiency, and there's no foreseeable improvement. So as a partner in this deal between the community, the airport, and the airline, if as an airline, my costs are going up, I can't run an efficient operation, and I'm not getting any partnership going forward on investment, what do I do? So the airline assets, the thing about airlines is the assets have engines and wheels. So I can take my 10 airplanes that are based in your city, and I can move them to another city in 90 days. So unlike building that auto manufacturing facility that once I'm in your community, my only choice would be to shut it down, I can take my assets and move them. So the dynamic of aviation is very different from a lot of other industries, yet it has a huge economic impact on the region that it's serving. And so what you're seeing now is communities in the U.S. that have been dehubbed by the recent wave of mergers. So you have a city, somebody mentioned Memphis before. Memphis has been dehubbed. Cincinnati has been dehubbed. Cleveland has been dehubbed. You now have pressure on the mayors. I was at a dinner the other night with the entire delegation from the state of Ohio, And Ohio has three main airports, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. Two of the three have been dehubbed. They have facilities that are empty. They've lost business activity. And so this impact is really being felt. So what's happening in Europe and the rest of the world? You see a rise of what this topic called superior airports, and you have the old world model. The old world model is you had the European connecting hubs between North America and the Middle East and, say, Asia. And it was British Airways, KLM, Air France, Lufthansa across the European hubs. But you have a lack of new runway capacity and you have diminishing customer experience. I think that photograph of T4 at Heathrow sort of says it all. If it looks that bad on the outside, you can imagine what it's like on the inside. Even though they try as a private operator to put more shops in it or do whatever, it still just systemically doesn't work. What the superior airports are doing is they're putting runway capacity, modern terminals, large aircraft capability, and passenger amenities. All the things that are tied up in the planning process, the environmental process, and the political process in the old world is now coming in. This happens to be Abu Dhabi. So the new world model is the Middle East airlines. The connecting hubs are now there, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha. They've decided to take care of the customer. The transit hotel was mentioned. You fly to Doha now, if you have a 10-hour layover, you can go out of the airport or you can rent a room in the transit hotel at the gate, stay there and go. So they've taken this customer base that used to fly through Europe in the old world model, and the new world model has come in and replaced it. This is Emirates' route map from between North America and Dubai. The red circle is sort of Europe. That's all the traffic that's overflying Europe right now, and the smallest airplane on those routes is a 777-300. So those are large aircraft, A380s and 777-300s that are overflying the European hubs. So while the community is engaged with the airports and while the political machine has gone on and the planning has gone on, this is also what's happening. And when you have a dynamic industry where your assets have engines that can fly 500 miles an hour, they're not going to wait for the development that is out there. So what are the critical community issues that are going forward that tie economic development and aviation together? Those communities that have vision are going to be able to see. I'm working with communities that literally are funding startup airlines in their communities because without the air service, with the political pressure that they're receiving, then we're able to go out and fashion a private equity investment with a public partnership and create an airline that's based in a city. It's kind of the model of the old bus terminal where your buses came home every night and they went out on the routes. Because cities are realizing it's so important to have that air service that they have to step up and do something. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha have developed the airports with the new terminals as part of their urban planning. Somebody mentioned it. They're shifting from oil to tourism, and they realize this. They invested the money. They did not hold up the planning process. They've invested in the airline and the aircraft, and the market has responded to what they've done. The U.S. and Europe is a matured market. The local environmental regulations have slowed the capital development. But how do you balance the need of the region with the need of the local community? You can't just bulldoze over the community aspects, but it's a question that maybe we can address. Aviation is very dynamic. The new aircraft types provide opportunities to overfly markets. It's not just the A380, it's the A350s or the 787s that fly longer, thinner routes and are able to miss these hubs. So every time Kurt mentioned $400 million for one international flight. If I stop flying through your European hub and I overfly you, that economic impact is going with that airplane. The growth of commercial service allows the community to benefit. I mentioned before, it's jobs, it's tax revenue, time savings, and quality of life. But who bears the responsibility for the economic development and the urban development of community trying to partner with private sector entities? So that's the question that we look at. And more importantly, who bears the responsibility when it suffers? Because these examples that I'm running through are the reality today as you're looking towards the future. And so in that sector of the airlines, the airports, the community, the political leaders, the community leaders in the business, who bears that responsibility if we're not going to act on it? So I'll leave you with those thoughts on the issue, and appreciate your time, and thank the organizers for allowing me to speak.